thank you very much, Jimmy, and thank you very much to the PNG Chamber of Resources and Energy for organising such a magnificent conference. And as Jimmy alluded to in my introduction, I've actually spent a lot of years working in Papua New Guinea. I first started working here in 2006, in fact, with Richard and Bronwyn, who's in his team as well, back in those days. And it's been a fascinating journey in PNG. Seeing the big projects, the exploration, all sorts of things. But today, I want to talk to you just about the Torres Basin, actually. Is there another slide before that? It just doesn't matter. Anyway, there's a disclaimer here, which is just what we need to do at all companies, apparently, these days. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a really relatively unexplored part of Papua New Guinea that is getting increasing attention and something that has become a big focus for me. I'd like to thank my co-authors. This talk was going to be presented by Alistair Shakerley, who's our exploration manager, but he's actually had to be called away as we're in the process of trying to attract a farm-out partner at the moment into this opportunity. Larus Energy itself is a very small company, and really all we've got is the two blocks that you can see. I'll show you later down in the Torres Basin, actually. But I'm putting this slide up really just to give you an idea that people sometimes forget how big Papua New Guinea is. These two maps are at the same scale, and Papua New Guinea is the size of most of Western Europe. It's a big country. And when you look at it, the only production we've got is from the Papuan Basin, and only from a very small part of that. There's a whole lot of the country that is really unexplored. And I think the talk after me by Brent McGuinness is going to talk about the New Island Basin as well. But there's a lot more potential in Papua New Guinea than a lot of people believe. And so most of my talk is going to be focused on that, and I'm going to do a little bit towards the end showing you a bit more about the Larus Energy opportunities. So this is PNG, and I'm going to give you, I use this slide a lot for audiences that aren't as familiar with PNG, so it might be a bit of overkill for this, but really PNG commercialisation began with the Kutubu fields up in the highlands of PNG back in the 1990s. And that put in the main infrastructure up in Kutubu and the oil export terminal down in the Gulf of Papua, the Kumul Marine Terminal. That was followed by PNG LNG, which was developed 2009 to 14 and has been a very, very successful project. And then we're looking forward, we hope, sometime next year to get into FID on the Papua LNG project, which is a different type of field, and I'll touch on those fields and why they're different from the Highlands fields. And there's been a lot of talk as well about Penyang, and it's great seeing the last talk showing what Penyang looks like and its geography and its geology, because that is also a potential LNG scale project. So that's really where the big stuff has been in PNG and where the focus has been. But offshore, you've got Pasca, and fantastic. They got to their commercial agreement yesterday at this conference, and that's been signed. So that's looking forward to FID sometime in the future. And you've also got a discovery at Pandora, which Kumul Petroleum, I believe, is looking to try and do a floating LNG. But that's really the limit of your offshore activity in Papua New Guinea. And it was great in the previous talk hearing a bit about the Western Province and Heritage breathing a bit of life into those Western Province fields. And I'm going to go through a little bit just showing you those different petroleum provinces and how they basically work. I mean, Richard gave us a great insight to the Western Province there just in the last talk. But where we're playing at Larus Energy, we've got two large blocks down in the southeast of the country, southeast of Port Moresby. And this is a very, very unexplored part of Papua New Guinea. So this is a map of Australia, and it's great, particularly for non-geologists, because it shows you really that Papua New Guinea is really a part of the Australian continental plate. You can see the highlands coming through the middle of Papua New Guinea, and that's really an impact zone as the Australian plate has been moving northwards, impacting to Southeast Asia. The geology has been pushed up, and we saw some examples in Richard's talk there, and we've got the highlands fold and thrust belt with basement involvement as those big basement blocks are being pushed up and push the overlying geology up. But if you overlay that map with a basin map showing, the blue here means deep on this map and red means shallow basically. So the blue blobs on that thing represent the Carnarvon Basin, the Browse Basin, the Bonaparte Basin. You get up to the top in Indonesia, the Bintuni Basin, and you go across to the Papuan Basin. Every one of those basins has got at least one LNG plant, some of them a lot more. Every one of them has got a very big oil industry as well. So Every Mesozoic basin on the Australian continental crustal margin is a giant hydrocarbon province. We thought the Papuan Basin basically ended, it's around the Parari River or somewhere like that, and didn't really extend to the southeast. But thanks to our friends in the multi-client seismic industry, and I think Searcher in particular, who we've done a lot of work with, a lot of speculative seismic data has been acquired in that southeast part of the country, and we can start imaging this Mesozoic section, this rifted margin of the Australian continental crust. We can start imaging that now and see that the Australian continental margin extensional basin continues southeast of Port Moresby. But in addition to that, we can see above that we've got a very, very thick tertiary section, not only with tertiary carbonates, Paleogene carbonates, but we've also got a very large flow of Miocene sands coming off from the hinterland of PNG. To me, as a geologist who spent a significant proportion of my career working in Southeast Asian basins in Indonesia, Vietnam, etc., this is interesting because all of the Indonesian production is coming from Paleogene carbonates in the tertiary and from Miocene clastics, sandstones coming off. So we've really got a part of an Indonesian-style petroleum system sitting here, directly above a traditional Australian Mesozoic petroleum system. That's exciting for Papua New Guinea. I'd like to actually acknowledge for the map here of the various basins. It looked very similar in style to one of the great regional maps that Richard just showed, and in fact the author was the same. So Bronwyn Davies, who works for Richard at Heritage, this was a map that she put together at Santos many years ago when we were both there as well. So thanks for that, Bronwyn. Great to see the maps being recycled. Just backing up what I was saying, these are just three stratigraphic charts for three of the basins, the Carnarvon Basin, the Browse Basin and the Papuan Basin. And in the rectangle there is really where all the action is at present day in those basins. Everything's Mesozoic. We've got these fantastic Jurassic source rocks in the lower middle Jurassic and in the Tithonian in the upper Jurassic. And we've got these really fantastic, good quality quartz reservoirs in the upper Jurassic and in the lower Cretaceous. And it's quite amazing to me when I started working Papua New Guinea, and I was very familiar with the Australian basins, just how similar the geology was, only it's been crunched in Papua New Guinea and pushed up into the highlands, and the structures are much more complex. But the sedimentary section is very, very similar. But what's different that we're finding out in PNG is that we've got that traditional Jurassic source, and we've got those reservoirs in PNG, which is, we all understand them well, and we've been exploring in the highlands and in the foreland for a long time. But the guys at Interoil who discovered elk antelope really changed the scene, because elk antelope doesn't have a Jurassic source rock. It's a late Cretaceous to possibly tertiary source rock. It's quite different. That is a different thing. And guess what? The reservoir is tertiary. It's a Paleogene carbonate. So it's quite a different setup to the rest of Papua New Guinea. And it's a different petroleum system, and it sort of extends that potential for finding something different in PNG towards the southeast. And when you look at it, we've got Paleogene carbonates down in the southeast, and we've also got these Miocene clastics that I mentioned before. So you've got potentially that Indonesian-style, South China Sea-style geology appearing above a traditional Australian continental margin basin. And to look back at PNG, compare it again to the Carnarvon Basin, these are just the exploration wells, they're not the development wells and projects. But there's been over 800 exploration wells drilled in the Carnarvon Basin, basically, in my lifetime, compared to 160 in PNG. So it's really unexplored on that sort of scale. But when you look down to where we're playing cricket, down in the Torres Basin down there, there's not a well within 250 kilometres of where we are. And yet we've got a rifted Australian continental margin and a really exciting tertiary section above it. So it is now, people have woken up to this. This is looking like one of the most exciting undrilled basins in the world. So there's a huge amount of interest in what Larus has uncovered with the work that we've done, and also that Total is drilling a well just to the east of where we are at Mailu, and we're hoping to be drilling in the same drilling program in the coming year. All right. So just going back a little bit to what we're looking for here, and this is just a cartoon summary of PNG geology, and I put this together mainly for non-geologists, so apologies to those who are in the room. But the top line there is the foreland, and that's what Richard was just showing us, very much these simple structures with some basement involvement out in the foreland, quite subtle on the seismic, as you saw, but they're quite different from the fold belt ones. Same geology involved, Mesozoic geology, but big faults involved, huge amount of basement uplift, quite radical geology, very hard, expensive exploration up in the fold belt. So those top two lines are the plays we're all familiar with and have been for 30, 40 years in Papua New Guinea. You get down to the tertiary carbonates. This is elk antelope, the line in the middle there, where you've got these big carbonate build-ups and you've got hydrocarbons into them coming from a late Cretaceous source rock or maybe even an early tertiary source rock. What we're chasing is down the bottom row here. Now, Total on the left, these are in situ carbonate platforms, and that's what Milo is going to be looking, something like that type of cartoon. Again, probably a late Cretaceous source rock, we believe, and I'll explain why in a minute. And what we're chasing is even younger than that. It's the Miocene fold belt. Yellow is sands there. They'll be their reservoirs, and they're caught up in a major fold belt that is in quite deep water. Both the Total proposal at Milo and our proposal at Nanamaropi are in about 1,800 to 2,000 metres of water. So it is difficult exploration land, but it's some stuff that's happening all around the world in water depths at the moment of that. So getting back to PNG's discovery history, this is what we call a creaming curve in the industry. So basically starting at 1950, there wasn't any resources or reserves discovered in PNG. And as you go through in the 80s, people drilled quite a few wells. This isn't wells, this is time that I've got on the horizontal axis. But it wasn't really until the 1980s that they began to crack the code of exploration in the highlands and were able to get heli-supported rigs in. And the big thing happened with the discovery of hides in the various Kutubu fields. Interestingly, after Angori and Pinyang, it sort of looked like the curve was creaming out, that we'd sort of found most of the big things there. But this is what happens in petroleum basins. Somebody has a new idea, it was interoil in this case, they drilled elk antelope, and suddenly there's a big kick up in that curve. New play concept comes in, changes the paradigm. Sometimes it's a new play, sometimes it's new technology that leads to these big changes. And this is what those three different plays that I showed on the previous one. The Foreland, which Richard was talking about, is the orange one. I don't mean to be disparaging to Richard, but so far people haven't found big fields in the Foreland. There is a lot of gas to be found in the Foreland, and there might well be big fields. It just hasn't happened. So that's the bottom part of that creaming curve, the orange. You can see the pink, not much success, and suddenly elk antelope, big kick up. But all the production to date, all the production is coming from the top one, the green one, the highland fold belt thing. That's going to change, obviously, as elk antelope gets developed. But at the moment, all our production is coming from that green, and that's where the bulk of the resources discovered and the reserves are in PNG. And according to the USGS, we've so far found in PNG a discovered resource of about 6 billion barrels of oil equivalent. So 1 billion barrels of oil equivalent is equivalent to 6 trillion cubic feet of gas, approximately. So you can just use that as a rule of thumb, because most of the resources in PNG are actually gas, not oil. But anyway, it's easy to think in terms of barrels of oil equivalent. But interestingly, that 6 billion barrels of oil equivalent, they're yet to find in these plays that we know about, the elk antelope and the fold belt, is 10 billion barrels. So we're not even halfway through finding stuff in the resources and in the areas that we know, the areas that Richard just talked about in the fold belt and in the carbonate play in the fold belt around elk antelope. Great news for us explorationists, there's a heap of stuff still to find in those conventional plays. When you look at this same creaming curve again, I've got in the red line is the number of wells drilled. And you can see what's happened. There was a big spike in the 80s and the 90s when people were discovering the Kutubu fields, bringing those in development. And what actually happened then, there was a fiscal framework in place that people could invest against, and so exploration went crazy in PNG. And that gave us a legacy in the great country of PNG to have a resource that could be developed, which we're still developing, which is the Kutubu area, PNG LNG, Angore's just come on. Still looking at bringing in other fields like the Juhar and the Pinyang eventually, and Maruk, etc. So that was a really a big thing. But since 2020 or 2019, we've actually not really drilled any exploration wells in Papua New Guinea of significance, and there haven't really been any discoveries. It's exciting that the PNG LNG joint venture is drilling the Hides footwall at the moment, right underneath the Hides field. But real exploration drilling has really stopped for a while. And I think that comes back to a few things, but this whole concept of the fiscal stability is an important one for PNG, and I can't overestimate that. But what's happened in the late, from 2017 onwards, 2016 onwards, the multi-client seismic companies have been very active. That's what I'm showing in the yellow. And, oops, sorry, I'll just go back a bit. And basically, I think we're going to open up a whole lot of new play fairways in the offshore due to the work that the things we're now seeing on that offshore seismic. We're going to see these Miocene clastic plays and more carbonate plays coming in. So this cartoon is really just showing us the variety of plays that we can see in the Torres Sub-Basin. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but the geometry is this normal rift system and then this massive tertiary system over the top. So at Larus, we decided to shoot 3D early 23 in January. We raised money by March, largely in Papua New Guinea. We went to the private sector in Papua New Guinea to raise a lot of our funds. By May, we had a seismic vessel, the PXGO2, in the water, and by June, we'd finished a 2,000 square kilometre seismic survey. We're the most active exploration company in PNG in 2023. That seismic's all been processed. The names of our contractors are there. The seismic was acquired in conjunction with Searcher Seismic. And we've had a huge number of experts working with us and great quality seismic processing of that. These are our two blocks, and I'm going to quickly just show you a regional line that goes through those two blocks. The northern block, where we've got the Nanamaropi 3D in that red envelope, is 579. That's where we're exploring, and we've just signed recently 695. This is a seismic line going from north to south across that, from towards the coast in the north off to the south. And you can see out, if you colour in the big sand packages, these are three major Miocene sand input packages. And in blue out here, you've got a very large Paleogene carbonate platform. That's very similar. It's not Mailu, but it's very similar to what Total will be drilling. So we've got that carbonate platform. We've got these big Miocene pinch-outs. And this is the most exciting play in the world at the moment in the Atlantic margins. This is where billions and billions of barrels of oil and gas are being found. Countries like Suriname, in Guyana, in Namibia, South Africa, Uruguay, etc. So this is the hot play in the world, but we're not looking to drill that. We've got those same sands caught up in a fold belt much closer to shore, which is what we're targeting in this area here, which I'll show a line in a minute. But just going back, that's the carbonate platform. That's what Mailu looks like. Simple carbonate platform draped by these Miocene sediments. We've got a lot of those type of structures in both of our blocks, not quite as big as Mailu though, which is a fantastic looking prospect. This is what the fold belt looks like in our block, and this is what we're targeting. The leading anticline there is the one we call Nanamaropi, and that's a prospect that will be over 1 billion barrels recoverable, probably close to 1.8 billion barrels recoverable at a main level. That's not an upside number, that's our main level. The upside would be around 4 billion barrels recoverable. The map on the bottom is what we mapped on the 2D seismic, and as always, when you get 3D, it's a little bit more refined, but our actual prospects stayed integral. We've still got these very competent, very large prospects in place that are very clearly mappable. It's not like seismic in the highlands of PNG. Any two geophysicists are going to come up with the same map on this stuff. It's not an issue. The quality of the seismic, this is some of the best seismic ever acquired on planet Earth. What I'm going to show you next is we've got the hanging wall, which is the stuff that's all thrusted up there. You can see those anticlines. And we've got the footwall, which is the bit that goes out of the basin. I'll show you an image, a map scale image of what that footwall looks like, where we've extracted the amplitudes of that, which really it's a seismic strength measure basically. But it actually, so this is like looking along the reservoir from a map view. Red and orange mean good, mean big sand. There's a bit with that funny texture towards the left, which is actually a big submarine landslide that happened back in the Miocene that's cut the reservoir section. But the rest of that section is very, very large sand sheet, probably over 90 kilometres across. We thought these would be something called turbidites, which where sands have rushed into the basin, into a deep water basin. They were, but even in the Miocene, we had strong currents here that have reworked these into very large, very high quality sand sheets that extend way out of our block, and that's why we're chasing the pinch-out play in this block to the south. But the thickness and the quality of these sands can be exceptional. If I start putting our prospects in, each one of these clicks is one prospect, one anticline that's coming in. We've got about 8 anticlines coming in behind Nanamaropi, all very similar, all very large. And then I flick the amplitudes on, you can see the sands are present really through all of those. Not quite as clearly imaged because the anticlines got quite steep geometries to them. And you can see another patch to it, other side of the mass transport complex, another set of prospects out to the side there. This image is actually the present day seabed. So the same process we had going in the Miocene is going on present day. Sands are coming into the basin, they're getting washed around by deep water currents. turned into giant sand sheets. And when you look at these things in outcrop, they look like big dune features. This is in Morocco, this picture in the middle down the bottom. Deep water sands that look like they're dune, wind-blown sand dunes on a beach or something. This is really quite new in sedimentary geology, and this is what the type of geology that is being exploited in a lot of the Atlantic margin and in places like Mozambique. You get net to grosses of up north of 80%, so more than 80% sand in the actual reservoir section, and very high quality clean sand. So they're some of the best reservoirs in the world. Exciting for PNG. In terms of source rock, we've got so many direct hydrocarbon indicators. We've got seeps, we've got samples recovered from drop cores, and on the seismic itself, we've got a huge amount of direct hydrocarbon indications as well. The map on the left, where blue means deep again, as it often does on these maps, the key, that's where the kitchen really is the stuff that's coloured blue. That's where our mature source rocks are. You can see where Milo is to the south. It needs to get migration from our block into that to fill their structure up, and that could well happen. But the beauty of our block is all our anticlines are directly overlying the most mature source in the basin. It's the perfect address for hydrocarbons. There's a little bit there about the oil recovered. It does type to a late Cretaceous to an early tertiary source rock. I suspect it's late Cretaceous based on what we can see on the seismic. And it's a very good, high quality light crude oil that we've sampled, unbiodegraded, coming out at the surface onshore. And we've got very similar fingerprints from inclusion samples from outcrop and also from drop cores. So this is just an example of an amplitude extraction that we think is a direct hydrocarbon indicator, showing the entire, this particular reservoir in Anamarope lighting up. We think it's oil, not gas. We've done a lot of work on this. Picture of the overall Anamarope structure. It's about almost 50 kilometres long, about 5 kilometres wide. And that's just our first prospect in many. A little bit more detail on Anamarope, just really showing you what the volumes would look like. With the main reservoir, the middle one that we're looking at, which we call System 2, on a mean case, that'd be about 1 billion barrel recoverable. If you include the other two packages that we can map around convincingly, you're about 1.8 billion barrels of oil recoverable at a mean level. So these are significant things. This is big scale oil. And really, if this works, this propels PNG from being a significant LNG exporter, but really to an OPEC scale oil exporter if this was to work. Now that's a big if. This is exploration, and it doesn't always work. But this is the sort of prospect inventory we've got in the block, where we've got the 3D. You can see the two groups of prospects, the central thing with the Anamarope, whole bunch to the west, unfortunately cut out by that Miocene landslide in the middle. Bunch of carbonate prospects over to the east, and a few more over to the west, and some more shallow prospects, which we imaged on 2D that was carried out by Larus in past years in the shallower water. Just a summary of what that previous cartoon was. Very convincing seismic, great amplitudes, and there's the prospects. So in summary, the Torres Basin is unexplored. It's got billion barrel potential. You can't map this seismic any other way but to get that scale of resource. So we're not just trying to pump numbers up, that's just how big these things are. We've got three plays, the Fold Belt play, which we're chasing, the Paleogene Carbonate play, which Total is chasing, and the Miocene Pinch-Out, which we're chasing in our new block that we've just signed and will be acquiring seismic in years to come. We've got strong indications of source, reservoir, we've got very good seal indication, we've got well-defined traps, lots of direct hydrocarbon indicators. Total's going to bring a rig in late 25 to 26, and we're talking to them. We want to be with Total, and we want to drill 2 wells. So if we can drill 2 wells in this basin this time next year, test the carbonate play, test the clastic play, this could be a great opener for PNG and really put us up on that creaming curve and create a real generation of wealth for Papua New Guinea as well. So we're working very hard to bring in a large new partner to PNG. That's why I'm giving this talk, because my technical team's off in a data room somewhere. We've got a large number of super majors trying to get into this block, but actually it's an exploration. It might or might not work. Super majors take this risk. That's how they find their reserves. But the question everywhere we go comes back to stability of fiscal framework in PNG. And I don't want to put a downer on that. I love this country, that spent a lot of my life working in Papua New Guinea. I think we'll get there, but we need stability. Nobody's going to drill $100 million exploration wells, which have a very high chance of not being successful, unless we know what the fiscal framework is. So my one message, bit of a downer I know after a very upbeat talk, we've got to get that right, and we've got to all work together to get a fiscal framework that works for PNG and works for investment. Thank you very much.